What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow. So today we are back going to be talking about Survivor Season 40 Winners at War, Episode 11. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa, and this was a record-breaking episode. So
That
cool.
it was. What a wild ride after last week not getting any information to this week being the Tony show, literally. And so Reddit has posted that Tony had 18 confessionals this episode, so the most ever in a single episode of Survivor, and the record was previously held by Colby, Dom, Angelina, and Tommy, but their record was in a finale and they all had 17, but in a finale episode, which is 2 hours long. So for Tony to double his confessional count last night to 41 confessionals total, the next highest number person with confessionals left still in the game is Sarah at 25. So he is almost double like everyone else left still in the game with confessionals, which I think is wild.
Yeah, I think it's wild too, especially because like before this moment, I would say Tony didn't have like great winner chances. Like I think he had a chance to win, but not super great. And now it seems like he's positioning himself as like a very real winner candidate, especially with Sophie being voted out.
Yeah, no, literally, like, it is a whole 360. There was also memes on the subreddit. We've talked about it before, but Alyssa and I don't really follow Edgic because it's very complicated, but sometimes I'll read summaries that I see on Facebook. And throughout most of the season, until maybe like 2 episodes ago, Sophie was leading in the winner potential. And then it switched to Tony 2 episodes ago based solely on the edit. And so to see Tony basically create an amazing resume in one episode, I think Tony's winner stock has skyrocketed. And Alyssa and I, at the end of this podcast, will discuss whether this move was too early or not. So I think this is just a really great way to set up the end game, and it's a little bit worrisome. Tony has 41 confessionals after this week, but the lowest number is 14, and that's with Denise and Kim.
Yeah, and I feel like Kim got most of her confessionals this week as well. So I'm thinking things aren't looking great for Kim. She might be getting the pre-vote out bump, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and so finally, a tweet that I saw that just resonated so much with this episode. It said, only Tony would set up a hit on his target, aka Jeremy, and then get too excited to go through with it, plot against his own alliance instead, and then tell Jeremy of the plan that he made to try and then get the swing vote, which I just think that sums up the episode so perfectly. It was such a wild ride of emotions because the entire time we were like, why the heck is Jeremy doing this? Why is Michelle on board with this? Like, what the heck?
Yeah, the whole thing was just like head spinning, especially because I was kind of hoping that Jeremy would be voted out simply because Jeremy gives Tony a fire token. And it's like, imagine giving someone a fire token, they go on to win the immunity challenge, and then they vote you out after you gave them a fire token. Like,
that would be the big baller thing to do. Don't need to pay them back.
Just like Denise did.
Yeah, so we start this episode with some reverberations from last week's episode. And it seems to confirm that Michelle was not in on the majority votes plan. She seems as confused as ever coming back into camp after last week's vote. We see her talking with Kim and like nobody really knows what was happening. And I found this just so weird because nobody was going to tell Jeremy what happened at tribal council. The majority almost seemed mad at him for leaving because he saved himself. Like Ben was mad at him, Tony was mad at him, but then it was like, wait, you were actually going to vote him out and you're actually mad at him back at camp because he used something to save himself. And then since they don't tell him what actually happened, they could twist all of the lies, and then they were all faking it like, yo, no, we weren't going to vote you out.
Yeah, it's so weird because it's like people keep saying they respect big moves, but then when people make moves, they're upset about it. Like, you can't be upset at Jeremy for using something to save himself because you would have been talking about how stupid he was for being voted out with an advantage in his pocket. So,
Yeah, and so I was just so flabbergasted that the majority was saying that they weren't going to vote for him, but we literally saw at tribal council when they all five walked off together. And then we see Michelle even say that, oh, now she's scared that the four of them, meaning her, Jeremy, Michelle, Jeremy, Denise, and Kim, were going to be picked off now. And then so it was just so crazy to see Jeremy throughout the entire episode believe all of Tony's double agenting. I was so frustrated. Like, it worked out well for Jeremy in the end for trusting Tony, but throughout the episode, I was like, oh my God. Tony is doing something amazing with his undercoverness, with his social game, that literally he can fool someone into thinking he wasn't actually going to vote them out of the game, the prior tribal council, and think that he's actually making a 5 with the minority when he's not really making a 5 with the minority.
yeah, and I feel like if you're gonna give props to Tony, you also have to give props to Kim because Kim did not seem to believe him for 1 minute. Like, he was, as soon as he started talking to Jeremy, Kim was like, "Yeah, I'm not believing it. Tony's doing his whole double agent thing," and I feel like that shows how good of like a player Kim is because she's able to read other people really easily, and she knew that Jeremy was being taken for a ride. And it kind of makes me wonder why Jeremy didn't like listen to Kim or why Kim didn't talk to Jeremy about this.
Yeah, like, huge kudos to Kim for pointing that out multiple times throughout the episode. Alyssa and I were texting during the episode, like, what the heck is wrong with these people? Like, did Kim not tell Jeremy what she was thinking, kind of thing? So it was just very weird. And I'm thinking maybe Jeremy is holding out hope that Tony is on his side because he wants to keep Tony around as a meat shield. And like, okay, I guess you can say that you don't really know what Tony and the majority was going to do, even though they said they weren't going to vote for you. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Maybe he's holding out hope for the meat shield strategy, but it was so hard to watch knowing that Jeremy was getting bamboozled, at least until the immunity challenge when Tony switched his plan to create a new majority. But I was like, oh my God, what the heck?
Yeah, I feel like Jeremy was kind of blinded by what he wanted to happen instead of what was actually happening. And I think we talked about how like a successful winner will change their game. And it seems like Jeremy is just relying on the same strategy that he had in Second Chance without really considering how different of a game Winners at War is from Second Chance. Because with Second Chance, everyone came in with a chip on their shoulder. Everyone came in with something to prove. And I feel like Winners at War, maybe they're still trying to prove something, but I feel like it's not as desperate for most of them. Like, I feel like the people who would be most swayed by the whole meat shield thing are the winners who are like the bottom tier winners that people like didn't think deserved to win, and then they are willing to do just about anything to prove that they can win twice and so they deserve to win their first time, etc. So like, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see with that. I think when we do talk about next week on Survivor, I think that's something that we'll have to factor in. And so if you are Tony, I think the next move that would be smart is to start targeting Kim, because Kim, this episode we saw, is like the only person, maybe Denise is in on the secret that Jeremy or that Tony is playing a double agent and they are in on his trickery. But lucky for Tony, this episode, he goes out waking up early. I respect that. And he finds a hidden immunity idol. So Tony literally wakes up from the calm, cool, and collected game that he's been playing thus far. And he is going sort of back to his old crazy antics. But I respect it. He laid low for this long, and then an idol got played last night. He knows another one is put out there. Waking up early, mad respect.
Yeah, and then shortly after he wakes up, Nick also wakes up and goes also idol searching, I guess. And I think this was kind of the point where I was confused about where Tony's allegiances lay. Because it's like Nick is in the majority group. And so it's like, shouldn't you be fine telling your allies that you're looking for an idol? Like, so
yeah, I feel like it's something we aren't seeing with the edit, because it does seem that like there's a lot of relationships that aren't being shown. Like it seems Nick and Tony are maybe closer than we've been seeing because of like the edit. I think Sarah has seemingly good relationships with the other girls like Kim and Denise, so that could be something that we're not seeing. In a secret scene that was posted, it was showing Sarah and Kim having a heart-to-heart, because Sarah was basically thinking that she was a bad person, and then Kim was consoling her. So it seems like there's a lot of relationships that we aren't being shown as like, oh, these people are tight kind of thing. And I don't know. I low-key feel bad for Nick because of his edit this season. He's been getting a lot of social media hate, and I don't think the edit is helpful for that he has since deleted his Twitter as of Wednesday's episode. And just the idol thing he was creeping on, and then all of the other shots where he's just creeping on, like, yeah, I think it's sort of funny. The whole vampire Donathan thing was sort of funny. And like, that just sucks though, that the thing that you were insecure about is that small of a sentence, and then it actually gets aired for the 8 million people watching. Like, that sucks.
yeah, I guess it's hard to be reality television because it's like your reality is shown, and I feel like everyone has things they don't like about themselves. And especially like if you're Nick and you're used to being edited like a winner, which I would argue is the best edit of the season, then it might be difficult to then see yourself in a less flattering light. So.
Yeah, so it's a weird edit, honestly. Like, we don't really hear any strategic talk from Nick. Him and Michelle were seemingly on the bottom, and now they're seemingly not on the bottom in two separate alliances, even though they seem to be in the same alliance before that. So we're just not seeing a lot from those two, which is interesting and could potentially be maybe a final tribal council, like no vote getter or the third place finisher at final tribal council. But it just, even when numbers are dwindling, and even if someone does make final tribal council, you'd think that they want to edit it in a way that you think that all three people at final tribal has some kind of chance at winning. But like, if Nick makes final tribal with everything that we've seen from him and the lack of screen time that we've seen from him in regards to strategic awareness and strategic chops, I like, you could probably rule him out at final tribal council. So it just seems weird that you wouldn't at least edit the final three to make it seem like an even playing field, to make it more cool at the end when you're like, oh my god, who's going to win?
Yeah, I think that sometimes they like to make it in a final three, they like to make one person obviously the GOAT, so that then it's like more tension between the two people who actually could win, because then you also get it so those two people have more screen time and stuff like that. So I guess we'll
Yeah.
have to see. I felt
Is
bad
it
for Nick though when Tony like sent him off to a place he had already searched, because it's like
See, and it makes me think that Nick trusts Tony way more than we're seeing, because to trust someone to split up, I would be like, no way in hell, Tony, I'm going to follow you. I'm not going to go over somewhere else when I know that you've already been out here earlier than me. Like, I want to stick with you. So I think we're definitely seeing some kind of relationship being edited out here, because I don't think if you're Nick, and if you don't trust Tony, you wouldn't just follow him. You have to trust Tony a lot to follow Tony's commands and be like, oh yeah, I'll go look over there, because it just seems like, why would you do that if you don't trust the person? So it reminded me a lot of in Australian Survivor this past season, where David stole Phoebe's hidden immunity idol after Phoebe told him the hidden immunity idol clue. And then David was like, oh yeah, you should go check over there while I check over here. So if you trust the person, it makes sense to split up. But if you don't trust the person, you would not be splitting up like this.
Yeah. And I just don't understand why Nick trusts Tony. Like, with the edit we've been given, I don't get it. But
missing out on something. So I've been seeing people have been arguing that Tony's idol should have been a pair idol where he would have to tell someone else about it. And I guess it must have been only a pre-merge thing that, like, Denise's idol and Kim's idol were pre-merge, like, half idols, and then post-merge they become whole idols and you don't have to share it. I would like to see the rules though, because I don't know, it seems like if they could just change it midway through, and now Tony not having to share that he has an idol and have to do the half idol thing definitely gives him so much more of an advantage, especially in like the next few weeks where it gets down to the nitty gritty and he's going to have such a huge target on his back.
Yeah, and I feel like you could argue that it's more interesting to have the half idols after the merge, because that's when the real deception like starts playing. Like, I feel like pre-merge, you're kind of equally screwed no matter who you give the other half of the idol to, because it's so early in the game that you can't really trust anyone. So I feel like they definitely should have done the half idols after the merge and not before the merge. And I didn't even think about that, but now I'm bummed that it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I would like to see it in the rules of production, like them saying that they were going to do half idols and then whole idols after merge, because if it's just planted that way for Tony, it's a little bit fishy. But if it was in the rules before, less fishy, because imagine if this episode Tony had a half idol and then like he told Sarah, because before the immunity challenge, him and Sarah were fine. And that was when he still wanted to get Jeremy out of the game. But then imagine that he told Sarah, and then after the tribal council, Sarah would maybe be so mad that she wouldn't give the half idol back to Tony. Like, it would have been so interesting to see. But Tony having a whole idol is just such a major advantage because nobody knows about it, and he's about to be a huge target that he can do a major blindside with a whole idol now.
Yeah, the anti-advantage, I guess you could say, for Tony is the fact that this episode he gets extorted, which I thought was the funniest thing, just because it's like he's reading the whole like paper about the extortion advantage, thinking he's gonna get to play it on someone, and then it's like they played it on you. And yeah, so we see Parvati and Natalie finding this on the edge together. And I'm beginning to think that Edge, they have like a buddy system, because no one's been alone finding an advantage in several weeks. So, like last week, Parvati was with Danny when Danny found the advantage. And I wonder if Parvati just like goes off with people randomly. Like, how is she always there? But yeah.
Yeah,
Parvati
maybe
and Danny, or Parvati and Natalie find the advantage and immediately start talking about whether they want to like actually extort someone or just cause a lot of chaos.
Yeah, maybe Parvati is someone that doesn't sleep in the shelter all day. Like, they were complaining that everyone just sleeps all day. And so, do we like this advantage or do we not like this advantage, Alyssa? When I first heard them say it on the edge of extinction, I was like, WTF? How are the people who were voted out of the game going to have so much power? Like, blocking someone from competing in the immunity challenge and blocking someone from voting at tribal council, but they still go to tribal council, so could effectively be dead man walking and still get votes at the tribal council. It just seems like it is a major repercussion on the game that is coming from people that were voted out of the game. So on that level, I'm sort of against it, but the way we saw it play out in this episode, I was totally fine with. Like, it was a funny sequence of events that we saw. So I was like, oh, this is so fun. This is so cool. But I think if it did affect Tony and then, like, say Tony got voted out this episode because he couldn't get 6 fire tokens or something crazy happened, I feel like I would have had problems with it.
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's like you could argue that any advantage from the edge is too much power for someone who's voted out of the game to have. And I felt like this extortion advantage was weird because it was specifically designed to like make them have as much of an impact on the game as possible. Because it's like Parvati and Natalie must have known that Tony did not have enough tokens on his own to pay for the advantage. So it's like, was their eventual strategy like, oh, we know he's not going to be able to get 6 tokens, let's price it out of his price range so that chaos will happen? Or is their strategy, we know he doesn't have 6 tokens, let's see how much he can get from other people? You know?
Yeah, and it seemed like from the episode, they were more on the side of let's create chaos and just be crazy, because when Parvati had a confessional, it showed 0 fire tokens. So Alyssa was saying that the price of peanut butter went up. So I guess maybe she spent all 4 fire tokens from Michelle on that. Question mark. We don't really know how many she spent, but she had 0 when she had the confessional. So it does seem a little bit suspect if you're on the edge, you're out of the game, and you have that much power to cause that much chaos, rather than, oh, I want fire tokens, let me create a bartering haggle system. I think if it's on the barter haggle system way, like last week we saw Michelle and Parvati doing the haggle for peanut butter, like, okay, that's more better, I think. But once it gets to the fact that, oh, they don't really care about the fire tokens, but they just want to see people get screwed over by some twist, then I think that sort of draws the line.
Yeah, and you could argue that, like, they already have a lot of power because they get to choose the winner. And you could theoretically be like, oh, we're going to use this advantage to get, like, Nick out because we know that no one on the edge will ever vote for Nick to win, so he just shouldn't be in the game anymore. So if that was their idea, I feel like that wouldn't be so bad. But I think especially you have to consider with this extortion advantage, I'm assuming that Natalie and Parvati split the fire tokens between the 2 of them. And so it's like, if they only priced it at 4, they would each only get 2 fire tokens. So it could be they priced it at 6, so they would each get 3, which is enough to buy an advantage when they get back into the game.
Yeah, see, that's something that I would like to know, and like maybe something Survivor Wiki can update us. Jeff can do it in his little after recap episodes, because I don't know, like, is it split 3-3? People online were saying because Natalie touched the bottle first that she would get all 6, and then it's up to her whether to split it with Parvati, which she probably did split it half-half. But yeah, the whole fire tokens thing, we just need it. We need more information, and I feel like we say that every single week when we talk about fire tokens, because it just sort of seems like they're making up the rules as they go. Like, okay, they said 6 fire tokens, but really they made it a price range. Maybe they thought it was doable, or maybe what if they were like, oh yeah, I would need you need to do 20 fire tokens. Haha, sucks for you. Like, is there an upper limit? Or can they just screw you over if they hate you?
Yeah, so that's a big question mark. I agree
But
about the whole fire tokens. We always say we need more information, though. So
Yeah, so Tony, his face when he got that advantage slash disadvantage once he realizes was pure gold. So we first see him go over to Michelle, and I think kudos to Michelle, literally, that she had this lie in her back pocket. She was probably thinking about it ever since she got her coin flip advantage, and her lie was just so good, like a half lie, half truth. And I think the way she created this fabrication definitely lowers her threat level, because it's like, okay, yeah, I have no tokens. This is my explanation for it, but it's not an in-game advantage, so I can't screw you over with it. So don't vote me out. But it's an edge of extinction advantage if I get voted out. And it was plausible enough that people would believe it, and Tony seemed to believe it. So I think like A1 job.
Yeah, so Michelle, I feel like that's good though, because I think Kim told Michelle that Tony was being a double agent. And so it's like, if you know that Tony might not be on your side and you don't have an excuse for why you can't give him fire tokens, that's bad. Because then it's like you might have to cough up a fire token to keep him on your side or on your side, and then still end up getting voted out. So Tony has 3 fire tokens to start with, and then he gets 1 each from Nick, Ben, and Jeremy, which
Yeah.
gives him his whole 6, so he can participate in the immunity challenge.
And this was wild. Like, holy crap. Sarah during the fashion show was saying that Tony's social game is butthole. And then he is able to pull this off, getting 3 fire tokens from 3 different people in 2 different alliances. Like, it's just a sight to see, honestly. Like, he was talking to Michelle. Michelle doesn't have any. And then he asks Michelle to ask Jeremy for a fire token. And then that's how he gets Jeremy's fire token. I was like, holy crap. Like, Michelle and Jeremy still trust you that much after last week's vote. Even though last week's tribal council was so crazy, Michelle was even at that tribal council, that you can bamboozle them enough to still give you 1 fire token. That was wild. I think Nick and Ben giving a fire token makes more sense, you know? So I think Tony just had such a great social game that he was able to pull this off. Imagine, though, if you started with 0 fire tokens, like if they cursed Michelle or something, that would be probably impossible.
I'm not sure if it would be impossible, but it would definitely be hard.
Very
So,
hard.
yeah. But it's a good thing that Tony was able to do it because he goes on to win the immunity challenge. And so it's like, if he hadn't gotten the 6 tokens, this episode would have played out so differently. Because I feel like part of the reason Tony had the balls to do the move with Sophie is because he knew he would be safe no matter what.
Yeah, and I think this would be an interesting advantage for the future, because there's so much social politicking that you can do. Like, say you're a Tony and you're going up to people and like you don't feel like someone is with you or is good with you. So like Kim doesn't trust Tony, and so Kim can maybe do a like publicity campaign going around trying to prevent Tony from getting fire tokens. It would be like such an interesting strategy to see how, like, oh, the person I hate got cursed, like I'm going to prevent them so I can vote them out at this tribal council. Like, I think it would be very interesting. And I think this episode, because it was still before the immunity challenge and this was when Tony was still against Jeremy and still wanting to vote him out, like preventing Tony from getting the fire tokens, you could feasibly make it a 4-4 tie vote at the tribal council if Tony wasn't able to vote. So if Jeremy and Michelle didn't trust him and they listened to Kim, because it could have worked out that way and Jeremy would have gone home even though he still gave his token to Tony, like it would have been such an interesting strategy.
Yeah, it would have been interesting, but I also feel like it would have been rough because with 4-4, you either have to trust that your alliance is stronger than their alliance and will stick together, or that your alliance is all willing to go to rocks together. And I feel like in Winners at War, neither alliance is prepared to go to rocks for anyone. Because it's like, everyone is fighting so hard to stay in the game that even the chance they might not stay in the game would make them flip on their alliance.
Yeah.
Like,
So
Jeremy basically did that when he yeeted out. He was like, my personal game is better than the game of my alliance.
yeah, I don't think you would go to rocks in a $2 million game, but at least if they didn't think Tony was on their side, making it a 4-4, maybe they could have flipped it 5-4 in their favor versus 4-5 in the Sarah Alliance favor. And so maybe they could have tried to even the playing field, but yeah, they probably are not going to rocks in a $2 million game.
Yeah.
So the immunity challenge, we touched upon it briefly. Alyssa, I wanted to ask you, since we saw Ben drop out and then Jeremy drops out right after before Jeff even finishes saying that Ben dropped out of the challenge. Do you think that Jeremy dropped on purpose?
I don't think so. I don't see a reason for Jeremy to drop on purpose. Because it's like, if it's between you and Tony, I feel like no one is so solid that they would rather have their alliance member be immune than have them be immune unless they have a plan in their back pocket. Like, the only thing I could think of is in like Heroes versus Villains when Parvati willingly dropped out to let Danny win individual immunity when she had 2 immunity idols in her pocket. And so it's like, I feel like Jeremy was not in a position where he would feel so solid in his relationship with Tony that he would let Tony win rather than let him win. You know?
Yes. Yeah. Like, I agree because to put your game on chance, $2 million down the drain and you like threw the challenge kind of thing doesn't make a lot of sense. But then if Jeremy, like we've seen at the whole entire episode thus far going into the immunity challenge, that Jeremy is so on the same page as Tony and he really believes that Tony is with him for some reason. We can't figure that out, but he seems so solid with Tony. I could almost think that Jeremy would drop out and let Tony win because of the meat shield strategy that Jeremy keeps on mentioning as well as employing. And so, like, letting Tony win 2 individual immunities back to back makes Tony such a big target, especially at the start of the episode. We see Jeremy and Ben be like sort of bickering, like, you're the bigger target. No, you're the bigger target. And so if Jeremy is thinking meat shield strategy, might as well let Tony win so he becomes the biggest target in the game, biggest physical target even. And so if Jeremy did win this challenge, though, he would have won 2 individual immunities right now, and maybe he didn't want to do that. And so if Jeremy does believe 100% that Tony is on his side and Jeremy thinks he's safe because he thinks it's a 5-4 split, then I could see him dropping down for the meat shield strategy.
Yeah, I could see why he would do it, but I still don't think that he did. Like, I think the circumstances are fortuitous for him and he might use this to his advantage later, but I still don't think that he would be comfortable enough to do it.
Yeah.
Especially given what he had to do last tribal council to keep himself from being voted out of the game.
I agree. It's definitely some like 4D chess. If he's thinking like 6 moves in advance, then the meat shield strategy, making Tony a bigger target, winning 2 individual immunities back to back, makes a lot of sense. And so Tony wins and he gets 2 more fire tokens. And the big question is, did he pay them back? And if he did, to who?
Yeah, because he borrowed 3 and he only won 2. I think we only see him tell one person that he's going to pay him back. I think he only specifically, explicitly tells Ben that he's going to pay it back. He tells either Ben or Nick that he's going to pay them back. And so I think that's interesting. I wonder if there was the assumption from the others that they would be paid back, or if they were kind of like, okay, this is a price I'm willing to pay to help my alliance. So that's interesting. But even if he agrees to pay back everyone, that still leaves him 1 token short. And the question then becomes like, for example, to tell Jeremy, like, oh, I actually also got tokens from the guys on the other side of the alliance line is hard. And then to tell like Ben or Nick, like, oh, I need to pay Ben back because So I feel like that puts him in an awkward position where he borrowed 1 more than he earned back. So
yeah, I think it's definitely tricky because it's 3 people borrowing 3 tokens. The person that's left out might feel a little bit insulted, like, oh, am I the least favorite person in the alliance because you paid me back last, kind of thing. Because, yeah, if it was like, oh, I got 3 fire tokens, but it's from one person and 2 from the other, you could split it even, or you could tell the one person that, oh, I gave the 2 back to the other person first, I'll pay you back next time, like I owe you. But at the end of the challenge, Tony literally says in a confessional that he's voting for Jeremy. And so at that point of time, you're like, okay, Tony still wants to vote for Jeremy. You're probably not going to give Jeremy that fire token because he's going to get voted out and he's probably not going to give the fire token back to you. So it would make sense to give it to Nick and Ben first. But then after the episode, it really depends. Do you give it to Ben now after you blindsided him? Or maybe he's so mad at you, he literally hates you and he doesn't want to work with you ever again. Or maybe you want to give it to Ben first because it can curry some good favor. Like, yo, bro, I had to do this move because of XYZ. I want to show you that I'm still good with you. Here's your fire token back. Like, we're still good, to try to curry some favor. So I really hope we do see how he gives his fire tokens back, if he does, because I think there's a lot of social maneuvering that Tony can do to make the fire tokens work in his favor next time.
Yeah, and so I think it's also interesting though, because if you say I'll pay you back next time, that implies that you're planning on winning immunity again. And so that I feel like would be yikes to whoever doesn't get their money this time around. Because either that means Tony is planning on keeping you around long enough for him to win another immunity challenge, or you never see your money. So
yeah, and honestly, I think a good twist would be if Jeff in the challenges didn't tell everyone the number of tokens that you would win. I think it would add a level of strategy to fire tokens. If Jeff is like, yeah, you're going to win this baggie of tokens, you don't know how many are in there, 1, 2, 3, 10 billion. And so it adds a question mark like, oh, do we want to vote Tony out now because he's won 2 challenges back to back? We don't know how many fire tokens he has. Maybe we should vote him out, kind of thing. Because when Jeff says you're getting 2 fire tokens, everyone else can keep a mental count. Like, okay, so Denise won 1, Kim won 1, Jeremy won 1, kind of thing, and keep a count. Versus if it's all question mark, I think that would make it so much more interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like not having all the information about your fellow people makes it interesting if it's the right information that you don't have, if that makes sense. So
yeah, so we see Jeremy, the plan to vote out Jeremy, and the plan to vote out Ben.
And I really don't understand the plan to vote out Ben. Because, like, Jeremy is like, oh, Ben and I were buddies, but now he annoys me. And normally when something like this happens, I was texting Rachel and I was like, where's the montage? Because normally when someone does something annoying, the editors will do like a montage of the annoying things that they do. Like when someone was talking about voting out Nick because he's always butting into conversations. Like they had a whole montage of him butting into conversations. But the only bad thing we see is Ben talking about not wanting to sleep on bamboo. And I feel like they all don't want to sleep on bamboo. Like, there was nothing about what Ben said specifically that made me be like, oh yeah, I can totally see where Jeremy's coming from with hating Ben. Like,
yeah, Ben's edit, I feel like, is weird, similar to Nick's edit. Nick, like we said, is getting the like creeper edit, and then Ben is getting the bicker buddies edit. Adam was bickering with Ben, and now Jeremy bickers with Ben. So it's just weird. Like, those two probably don't have a lot of chance in winning the game, Nick and Ben. So they're being edited like as dodos, it seems. So it's just really weird, I think. So I don't know. The majority of 5 with Tony wanted to split the votes, 2 on Michelle, everyone else on Jeremy. Denise and Kim are on board. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to flip because they don't, at least Kim is smart because she thinks they don't have the numbers because Tony isn't on Jeremy's side in actuality. So it makes sense for them to flip and save their own butts.
Yeah. I agree. That's all I really have to say about that.
Yeah, and then we see Denise, Kim, Jeremy, Michelle, and Tony. Supposedly, they are going to vote Ben out. And then, in an amazing game of social politicking with no advantages whatsoever being played, we had a great tribal council and time leading up to tribal council. So I think it just goes to show we don't really need advantages for good TV. So we see Tony disliking that Sophie is getting too close to Sarah. I feel like we've seen this storyline the past few episodes. Adam mentioned it a few times when he was going to get voted out and wanting to target Sarah, Ben, Sophie. So last week we saw Sophie get votes. So it makes sense, especially because Tony wants to be Sarah's right-hand person and he can't do that if Sophie is there. And when the majority alliance is splitting votes on Michelle and Jeremy, that is risky and it makes it a good time to strike. So Tony realizes this and he tells everyone his plan right before tribal council.
Yeah, and I think that was also a really great idea because the earlier you tell people, the more time you have for the plan to change and the more time you have for the person to hear about the plan. And I don't think Tony knew that Sophie had an idol, but if he had known, it would make even more sense that he had decided to wait longer to like even tell anyone, because if Sophie gets spooked and plays the idol, then sucks to suck. She gets to say she knows that you're pissed at her. Sarah knows that you wanted her out, and then you also are down one person in whatever alliance you decide you're a part of that day. So I think great on Tony for waiting long enough, especially because I think sometimes Tony gets so excited about his ideas that he won't wait the right time. So
yeah, and I think it definitely goes to show returnee players versus newbie players. They know the tricks like this in the plan could change and everything like that. People were giving Nick some slack on the internet for going with Tony's plan just so easily, but I feel like there's probably stuff like we were saying, they have a relationship that we aren't seeing, and I think it does make sense for Nick to go along with Tony and not vote Jeremy out because Nick is sort of seemingly like a floater. He's lost his main alliance in Wendell and Yule, and he said that in the game. And so, like, if he wants to get further, maybe he's thinking, oh, this foursome could be a solid foursome, and then we maybe have the numbers so we can ride it to the end. And maybe Nick is thinking, like, sort of meat shield strategy, like they would never vote me, Nick out when you still have Tony in the game at final 8. So I think voting out, if they thought Sophie was a floater and like people were saying, oh yeah, Sophie doesn't leave camp much, stuff like that. If Nick thinks Sophie's a floater too, you might as well vote her out because she's trying to do what you're trying to do. And so I think it does make sense for Nick to go along with this. And then he is probably thinking that he's going to vote Tony out and he's not going to the end with Tony, but he's just using these people for a vote.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who voted for Sophie has reason to vote for Sophie. So, like, yeah, I think it makes more sense to me than some votes earlier this season where it seemed like people were disadvantaging themselves by voting for a certain person. But so Sophie gets voted out with the idol in her pocket. And then she tells everyone that she had an idol in her pocket, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, see, like the whole Sophie plan, it like Jeremy has to do it, right? Because Tony is the person who was going to be your fifth, and that would have gotten you the majority. Like, there's no thinking you have to vote Sophie out. If you don't, then Jeremy would have technically voted himself out of the game. So, like, him thinking about it, acting all confused, like you have to do it because Tony was the person that was going to make your majority, and then he's telling you he's not doing that anymore. So that was that. And I think, yeah, Sophie saying that she has the idol in her pocket was bad for Sarah, because technically we think that Sarah is the only other person who knew Sophie had the hidden immunity idol. So by Sophie announcing it at Tribal Council, and it was probably just because she was so, like, it was a lot of emotions happening that she just said it. But now Tony could go out and find another hidden immunity idol tomorrow, technically.
Yeah. So I feel like Sophie probably thought of that as she was like going to the edge. But emotions are running high. And I think also Sophie wanted to give everyone credit where credit was due and be like, yeah, I really messed up this time. Just because that can affect the jury. And it's a little different considering she's going to go live with the rest of the jury, but maybe she thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, and I think amazing social play by Tony, because if he could fool Sarah and Sophie that they were actually forming some coup to vote Sophie out of the game, like Sarah knows Tony from 3 seasons. They've played all 3 seasons that Sarah has been on together. So they know each other super well. And then to pull this over that Sarah doesn't even know, to warn Sophie, to have Sophie play her idol, was just so like crazy and such good social play by Tony. I think it's like, wow, that he could actually pull that off, a 4-3-2 split after breaking up the majority alliance. I think it was super, super cool to see. And it feels bad for Sophie because she was definitely a front runner and she had a great pre-merge. And the Angelina curse of women getting voted out with hidden immunity idols in their pockets, the number continues to rise. And I was just so sad when Sophie said that she thought she came in as a bottom tier winner. But I think throughout the season, she has definitely proved that she can hold her own with the big dogs. And I think that was really cool to see that evolution.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool too, and I hope that people like respect Sophie as a winner more. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we see Sophie give her fire tokens, one to Kim and one to Sarah. And so that definitely does lead me to think that Kim and Sarah and Sophie are closer than we see, kind of thing, because if she didn't give it to Tony, she didn't give it to Ben, maybe she thinks the boys flipped on her, but we see her counting, 4 votes. Who could those 4 votes be? And she gave it to those 2 people. So I think it could be something to keep our eyes on, that they definitely have a stronger relationship that we're seeing. And I think it was really interesting, the Edge of Extinction throwback, when we had a clip of Tyson saying how not everyone can handle being voted out of the game. And then he's like, oh yeah, Wendell, I don't think Adam can handle it. But then nothing actually came of that. So I was wondering if maybe it's foreshadowing someone quitting Edge of Extinction soon. Maybe Sophie getting idled out. That's probably really hard. All of these one-time players and one-time winners, they've probably got to take it a lot harder than someone like Tyson, who's been voted out numerous times.
Yeah, and I think also Tyson was voted out before he became a winner. And I think it's easier to like do better in the game and then do worse again than to like have your only survivor experience be winning and then suddenly you don't win. And I feel like Edge also makes it harder to process because then you're still holding on to that little bit of hope, like maybe I'll still win. So, yeah, we will have to see. I really thought Adam was like looking at that sale pretty hard. So, maybe next week we'll see something.
Yeah, and so I think it really does go to show, like we were talking preseason, the one-time winners don't know what it's like to be voted out of the game. And on Sophie's Instagram, on Sophie's story on Survivor on CBS's Instagram account today, she had that interview where she was basically saying like, oh, she had those weird senses, this is off, why is no one talking to me? But it didn't translate to, oh, I should play my idol tonight. So that's definitely something, is a learning goal for people that who have played multiple times. Like Jeremy has that spidey sense since he has played multiple times, all of them. And I think it will be very, very interesting next week to see if it was too early for Tony to be doing this move. In the preview, we see Sarah is pissed off at Tony. And so maybe Sarah and Kim and people create another alliance to try to vote Tony out. But even if Sarah goes with Ben, Kim, and Denise, it's still a 4-4 split versus Tony, Michelle, Jeremy, and Nick. And so I feel like at Final 8, it might be a little bit too early for Jeremy to flip and vote out his meat shield of Tony. And Tony has an idol, so honestly, I feel like he's definitely safe next week because he has an idol, but I think 8 might be a little bit too early if you're Jeremy to flop. So 7, 6, 5 would be a lot harder for Tony to get past. But I think if he can maybe not play his idol next week and save it for when it gets more down to the nitty gritty, then he will be more set up for making it to Final Tribal Council. But I think if he goes from 2 individual immunities back to back to a hidden idol play, he's going to have the biggest target on his back ever.
Yeah, and I think it'll be hard for Tony to keep going, especially because Sarah seems super pissed at him. So, like, we were shown in the preview her being mad at Jeremy, but I feel like the editing is trying to make us think she's going to be mad at Jeremy when really she's mad at Tony. So,
yeah. And
it's like when your one major ally votes out your other major ally, that's not cool, man.
Yeah, I wonder like how long Sarah can actually be mad at Tony for, because we're seeing Sarah doesn't really have that many other options. I feel like her best case scenario is to forgive Tony right now, but not forget that Tony double crossed her and then vote him out in 2 weeks, maybe in 2 tribals from now when it gets down to the numbers. Because I think if Sarah votes out Tony, she becomes, and her and Jeremy and Kim become the biggest targets. I think if Tony is in charge next week, he should vote Kim out because Kim is seemingly the only person that is super, super outwardly against Tony. And I think Sarah just doesn't seem to have too many options, because even if she goes with the girls with Kim and Denise, she's still at a minority. So maybe she has to suck it up and go with the Michelle, Jeremy, Nick group, because I don't know. I just don't see them flipping on Jeremy this early. Maybe Michelle and Nick flip, but we really don't know where those 2 heads are at. So we can't guess.
Yeah, I would like to see more confessionals now that there's fewer people around from the people we haven't been seeing as much of. I feel like we've been seeing some of Denise through Kim, but like Michelle, kind of, where is her head at? I feel like we haven't seen a lot of her since Wendell was voted out, which is lame.
Yeah, and that really dwindles the number of people who actually have winner stock. I think you can argue that if someone starts to get a lot of confessionals now at Final 8 going into the last month this show is airing, you could still win. You know, Chris Underwood came back at the finale night and still won. And so there still is some hope for these people, but I would definitely say that, like, Tony would probably be the person with the biggest chances of winning, but also the biggest target. So that makes it difficult. I could see Jeremy winning, and then I would definitely see a drop down to like Kim and Sarah, and they need more confessionals. And then I think the bottom chances of winning would be Ben, Nick, and Michelle, just because we like have not seen any of them. And stick Denise in the middle.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see next week how this shakes out. I really think whether Sarah gets voted out next week or not will be really telling as to like what the name of the game is, because if Tony is like cleaning up his loose ends now, stuff is gonna get real. So
Yo,
I guess
imagine, yeah, if we see Tony win Survivor season 40, that would be literally so wild. And the preview next week when he's in his sky nests, I'm just wow. It's such good TV. It definitely delivers. Like just Tony peeking out of a goddamn tree is like like what the heck is happening? It's so cool.
I wonder though if he's going to be able to hear, because I feel like that's harder to hear than being on like ground level, especially because voices don't really travel up. So we'll
That's
have to
true.
see. We'll have to see next week if his spy nest works as well as his spy shack did. And yeah, I'm excited for next week. I'm excited to see, as we're getting down towards the finale, who really has a chance of winning. And yeah, I'm also super excited for the Survivor finale, which is still not for a bit yet, but I'm excited for it anyway.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we will see